So the topic of this panel, or the title, is How Opportunity Zones Can Work for DC Businesses and Entrepreneurs. And so we have an incredible, illustrious panel here today. And so I can directly attest to not only their commitment to the community, but also their expertise in this space. And so what I'd love to do is have each one give us kind of a 5-minute overview around who they are, what they do, and their interest in opportunity zones. So, who'd like to go first? All right, perfect.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning. My name is Tony Thomas, and I've been a venture capitalist for about the last 25 years. I started out investing from a pension fund in California that invested in private equity and venture capital partnerships. In 1996, I moved east from California to Silver Spring to work for Syncom Venture Management. And Syncom was a pool of venture capital funds that invested in early stage media, communications, and technology companies, primarily led by minority entrepreneurs. So we were early investors in Black entertainment television, Radio One, TV One, many radio stations and television stations across the country, cable infrastructure, and so on. And so we had and raised our money from very large public pension funds, state of New York, state of California, and others, typical investors in venture capital. I was a partner there for a number of years, about 17, 18 years. In March of last year, I joined Harbor Bank to build out their equity investment platform. Harbor Bank is a community bank based in Baltimore, the only African-American led and owned bank in Baltimore, in Maryland actually. And they have a number of different subsidiaries. One is a commercial bank, which provides commercial lending to small businesses and real estate entities. They have a community development corporation. They have a very large new markets tax credit practice that's been very successful over the last 15, 20 years. And we just built out a new subsidiary called Harbor Bankshares Capital Corporation that is going to be investing in privately held businesses, but we're focusing on opportunity zones as our entrance into the market. And we're entering in 2 ways. One, on the financial advisory side, helping entrepreneurs and developers look and access opportunity zone capital and other types of capital and tax incentives, as well as creating special purpose vehicles or individual funds that are going to be investing in entrepreneurs and real estate projects. For us, we are very excited about small business. We think that is a huge opportunity. While a lot of people are looking at real estate, we're excited about small business and applaud DC for creating this panel focusing on entrepreneurs and small business.
Thanks. My name is Anthony Apple. I started a company called Be Good about 15 years ago. Be Good is a fast casual restaurant chain. I grew it to 80 restaurants. It'll be to 100 in the next sort of 3 to 4 months. I struggled raising money for my business throughout the history of my business, from the first restaurant through the 80th. How do you raise capital? I had no money, so we couldn't get debt. And we really needed capital to grow our business, so we raised equity. As an entrepreneur, I hated raising equity. I hated selling a piece of my business. To me, that it was something wrong with it, to give up control of your business. My business became very big. We had 3,000 employees, and I raised $60 million. You can imagine what that meant to the ownership and to the control of what I had built. So I am focused on using opportunity zone capital in a way that can support businesses and can support growth. I believe there's a really good way to do that. I am partnering with Bowman Keaty and the McKeety Group. They have an amazing history in sort of neighborhood revitalization. I believe in small business. I'm finding a ton of really great small businesses in the areas that we're working in and in opportunity zone areas. I believe that it has to be authentic. I believe that this idea of bringing a Starbucks in to Anacostia is not the best idea. I believe in finding a real business that is successful and that grew up in that neighborhood is a very interesting thing. And I think that there are amazing businesses, at some levels, diamonds in the rough. So when I was raising my money, when I was building my business, we were located in very affluent areas. But what I'm telling you, and I'm telling you the truth, the businesses that I'm finding in areas that I'm working in opportunity zone areas, they are stronger than my business. And I say that with all honesty, that food is better if they're restaurants. They have as much passion as I did. They work as hard as I did. I think there is a real opportunity here. I think it has to be done right. But I think, there will be a lot of people out there trying to use opportunity zone capital as a way to get around the system, as a way to defer tax. I also believe that there will be a lot of people, and I hope Bo and I and the McKee Group and I are those type of people, that can use opportunity zone capital to invest in businesses that can help revitalize areas. And that's sort of what we're focused on.
My name is Melissa Bradley. I'm managing partner at 1863 Ventures. We're an accelerator for new majority entrepreneurs. We've been around, we actually launched here in 2015 at the Rise Center. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. I am not optimistic about opportunity zones, but that's also because I had the privilege to serve in the Treasury Department under Clinton and then served in the White House under Obama, and know that there is historically a disconnect between what people intend and what actually happens. I do think there are ways to make it work, so I want to focus on just a few data points, and if anybody knows me, I rarely use notes, but I want to make sure I stay on track, and I don't get angry like I usually do. So one is this, I know, but I want to respect Sharon, she invited me, I want to make sure my folks get invited back. So one, I think what we have to be mindful of, the opportunity zone is a fund, and what's the history of black and brown people with funds? Less than 1%. So we have to own what the vehicle is. It is a tax incentive for wealthy people that is massed in a fund with the intentionality of doing good. Now that good could have happened with or without the tax incentive, but it hasn't. And so I think we just have to own that there are reasons to be optimistic, but reasons to be cautious, because the underlying structure is the same structure that has not served us well and is currently investing in less than 2% of us. So I think that that's one thing to recognize. Two, because of the variety of things that I do, I've had the chance to sit with lots of opportunity zone investors. And one of the things that I'm very proud of in the work that we do with entrepreneurs of color is that we have a lot of competitive advantages that people are not aware of. One, we don't need as much capital. We are highly capital efficient. That's also because we haven't gotten it, but we outperform. African American women are starting businesses 6 times everybody else, and if we had been invested in like we should have, we would have contributed $300 billion to the economy and 900,000 jobs. So there's clearly an economic opportunity. The reality is, if I'm a real estate person and I have $700 million and I want to reduce my transaction costs and write one check, I have an absorption problem in communities where I live. Because we can't typically absorb that. We would drown and kill entrepreneurs if they got $700 million. So thinking of the dissemination and deployment of the funds to vehicles that we actually qualify for, I see some highly successful people in here. But raise your hand if you think you could get $700 million right now. Okay, well, that's a problem. So I think we have to be mindful, right, that while the opportunity is there is work to be done on behalf of intermediaries, certainly on behalf of the city, to create vehicles that are not optimizing return and minimizing transaction costs, because it costs money to do business in our communities, but that's because of the historical disinvestment that has been there. I think the other piece is that timeline. We think 10 years is a long time, but there are lots of 10-year funds. And if I look at people, we just launched, I see some folks, a Beyond 5 campaign, which is recognizing African American Latino businesses that have survived beyond 5 years, which according to the SBA is non-existent. There's probably at least 20 of you in this room right now. But the reality is, but the reality is that part of that is because you've had patient capital, often your own credit cards, but be able to fulfill and return in a 3 to 5 or 7 year time horizon is not realistic for all businesses. And so it's important just to be mindful of that. And then because I've come out of banking, I get excited, right? Because there should have been proxies like CRA and LITC and NMTC, but I've been in DC since 1985. They're here, but I don't really see what's happening over here. And so we have to be mindful that this is an opportunity for even more money to enter our communities without accountability. And so the final thing I would say is that, and this is, I already called Karima before she left, I think this is where, if anybody works in the philanthropic world, we know that technically there's this law or this policy that says you have to give out 5% every year. We know that probably 80% of the foundations don't. And so this lack of accountability and real guidelines, the Impact Investing Committee issued some guidelines out of Utah that are nice and warm and fuzzy, but they don't address some of the fundamental challenges like mass gentrification. They don't address the challenges of this is a pathway of intent to say I improve the community irrespective of the residents. So this is where I told Karima, but I'll say it for Sharon in particular, this is where I hope the city steps up and talks about that if a $700 million fund has come in, they can only take a percentage of a block, or can only take a percentage of a neighborhood, because $700 million could wipe out blocks over here. And that means that there is no opportunity for us to hang on. I think the final thing I would say is that for businesses, I think there is a chance, but the bottom line is you have to find people who are willing to create those structures. Because most of the businesses we see, they're barely surviving with 50 grand. They really need 150 grand. And a lot of these large funds are not going to write that because the money exists. It's not an issue of whether or not capital exists. It's can it meet the people where they are at the minimum cost. So I'm optimistic that there'll be policies from the city that will help mitigate the risk to the individuals while the communities are being revitalized. I'm optimistic that people who I know are doing the amen and applauding. You have been here a whole hell of a lot longer than me, and your voice will be heard. And I'm optimistic that businesses will figure out how to use joint ventures, how to use other types of vehicles to combine balance sheets so they can present larger, so they can indeed pull down $250,000 to $1 million.
All right. Tough act to follow. Don't glaze over like the person who stands up and reads the weekly announcements after the sermon. It's like the energy is high, and I'm gonna try and keep it high. Yeah. Oh. Well, I'm not gonna top that. So I might just tell. I got 5 minutes to kick off. I might just tell 2 stories. The first story is a story that I made up, but it's almost certainly true. The second story is definitely true. So we'll start with the made up story, and I think it's one of the things that Melissa said right before going on was she's like, the way opportunity zones work out is if we get people to do things that they should have been doing anyway. That's success for the whole thing. And so I don't want to go into the details of the legislation. I know other folks are more deep in that. I do want to tell a story of something that I think really contributed to the unwinding of this country. And I am making up this story, but I think it's almost certainly true. So about 40 years ago, there's a gentleman who lived right nearby here, very successful. Let's say he started a bank, one of the first black-owned banks in the country. Builds a great bank, starts a couple other businesses, and then a guy who looks like me comes down from New York and works for a Wall Street bank and says, you've been really successful. You're starting businesses. Just keep starting businesses. Don't worry about your money. We'll take care of it. Just pay us a couple of percentage points, and we'll send you more money than you send us every year. And that happened all across the country with successful business people in all parts of the country. But what ended up happening was people's money became decoupled from what was happening right in their backyard. So it may be, for example, that a private equity firm buys a company down the street and lays off a couple hundred people that you know, and your money is invested in that private equity firm, and so long as you get your checks, you don't really ask too many questions. As long as everyone's doing well, that's fine, but when things start to fall apart, when our society becomes much more unequal, it's not fine. So for example, 2008, again, this is made up, but it might almost certainly be true. In the recession, 41% of community banks, small community banks, and more than 50% of black-owned banks went out of business. Maybe this bank that this gentleman started. Maybe another local entrepreneur says, that bank is doing really important things in Ward 8. I'd like to bail out that bank. The person who looks like me, who wears the tie, says, that's a really stupid use of your money. It's a really risky time. You can't go buy a bank. So don't buy a bank. And then what ends up happening is it craters certain communities. And so we've had this decoupling of what money is doing and what's happening in communities, and people have not been thinking intentionally of, put my own real money into this block, let's see what happens. And the positive thing about opportunities, it is amazing to me that there are this many people in this room. You're all here to listen to Melissa, so maybe it's not as amazing after hearing talk. But it is amazing to me that I've been in over 50 meetings like this across the country. People are thinking intentionally around what money can do in the world, and there's a worry and fear and distrust, which is justified. There's hope and optimism, which is maybe unjustified, but it's good that it's there. And so I see a conversation that could get people focused on what they should have been doing anyway. So the second story, which is true, here's an example of what I think an opportunity zone investment could look like that would be worth aiming for. So about 10 years ago, I started a group called Village Capital, and I started realizing, we raised money from 30 investors, raised about $20 million, invested in over 100 businesses across the country, many of which are working in neighborhoods like this one. And what we always found was people in Austin, Texas, always wanted to know what the Austin business were doing. People in DC always wanted to know what we were doing in DC. People wanted a deep and local connection. And so there was one large, successful entrepreneur in Louisville, Kentucky, who had invested in our fund and says, you've invested in a couple of startups in Louisville, what more can my money be doing? And he went to a church that was in southeast Louisville in a neighborhood called Shelby Park, which is today an opportunity zone. It's about, demographics not different from this neighborhood, probably 20% unemployment, probably 40% vacancy, 22,000 median income. And we started saying, well, if you wanted to put more of your real money, not your just like, fake, good for your appearance money, but your real money in this neighborhood, what would it look like? So we pulled together folks from this community in Shelby Park, and we identified 11 vacant buildings in about a 3-block radius. We identified 12 businesses that were currently there, currently operating, and we built a portfolio. It was about $4 million, and invested in 11 businesses, in 11 properties in 12 businesses. For example, there was a street corner that was the main kind of commercial hub, and one of the things that folks in the community really wanted was a kind of space, a cafe, a kind of meeting place that wasn't, a Starbucks wasn't a chain. And there was a woman in the neighborhood who ran a ministry that had taken women that were working in the sex trafficking industry in Louisville and helped them find living wage jobs. At this street corner, there was a huge building that had been abandoned for about 30 years, and everyone knew that it was used as an off-the-books brothel. And people said, we gotta do something about that building. And the community was very intentional around what a good vision would look like. So partnered with a local CDFI, got a $75,000 loan to this woman named Rochelle to open a bakery that now pays women a living wage. And these are women who used to work in the sex trafficking industry who now make a living wage at a bakery. It's kind of a hub of the community. So that was about 3.5 years ago that we went through this process, deployed about $4 million. The community had a voice every step of the way. 4 years later, there's been no displacement. There are about 200 new jobs. These 11 entrepreneurs from the community who got financing are now part of a Main Street community. And it took an incredible amount of coordination. It took an incredible amount of intentionality, but it is a lot of capital that's going in an interrelated way that is a vision of success. So I guess what I would say, and we can go deeper into this, is success for this neighborhood is not going to be, hey, a fund is here, money is here, let's go do deals. Success is thinking at the ecosystem level, what are the needs? Some of it may not be opportunities and equity, it might be philanthropy, it might be debt, it might be city incentives, but there are ways to think about getting it done. So anyway, we can talk more about it, but I'll stop there.
There's a saying, leave the best to last, and listening to my panel, I'm not so sure we've done that here, but I will try to rise to the occasion. So I work at the Milken Institute, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization, and we're focused on studying solutions that create jobs, that widen access to capital, and improve people's health. And our work in opportunity zones started at the end of a partnership that we had with the Small Business Administration called the Partnership for Lending in Underserved Markets. And from 2016 to 2018, we were focused on how do you get access to credit to particularly more minority communities across the country. And I think Harbor Bank actually was a kind of deep partner of ours in Baltimore and in Los Angeles. And at the end of that program, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was coming online, and it seemed to be a real opportunity either for great things to occur, or for nothing to occur, or for terrible things to occur. And so what we wanted to do is lean in and do what we could through our policy and our analytical expertise to try to steer that ship in the best direction we could. So for the last year, we've assembled tax experts, legal experts, the investment community, community bankers, folks like Melissa that come in and help advise us to help the Treasury Department and the IRS understand what issues need to be identified for this really to work for the most people. And that started out with an idea, let's put a 2-pager out there and just explain this to folks. And that turned into a 60-page document with all sorts of arrows on it and tax kind of references that is potentially useful to people in the room. The hope being that the more you get the word out, the more people understand this, the more they're empowered to negotiate better deals for themselves, the more they're able to avail themselves of this and not just be captured by, the wealthy across this country. We'll release a second round of that guidance very soon, focused on operating companies, because we believe that you've got to create jobs, you want to increase incomes, and increase wealth in these neighborhoods, not just build buildings that people there can't afford. And so that's where we're going to be focusing our attention. We're also hosting a number of these events across the country, focusing on particular issues that are affecting those communities, whether that's the opioid crisis or access to health care, access to jobs, affordable housing in the Bay Area. And the idea there is to bring local government together to understand what their priorities are for their zones and what they're prepared to do to steer capital to that. What the local philanthropists are excited about, bringing the community foundations to the table, and bringing the business community to the table, including the local community banks that understand the local dynamics much better than anyone who's not from town will understand. So the key is to bring all these folks together, the hope being that we can create some strategies and some research reports, is what we do, that can tell people how to avail themselves of this program.
So that was really great, an excellent overview of what you all do, your expertise. And so what we'd like to do now is jump into some questions that the city did a great job in kind of crowdsourcing from the general public as well as from the business panel, and then we'll open up to the group to get additional questions. And this is open to anyone that'd like to take the first crack. Describe some scenarios in which small businesses could actually leverage opportunity zone investments. Tangible, specific ways, types of businesses, types of opportunities. Trying to take it from the esoteric to the real.
So I'm going to start with what we were actually talking about outside and give two quick examples. So one, I think it's in this vein of entrepreneurs not wanting to give up their business.
Yeah.
And Ross can speak more, but this idea that to have capital that has a slightly longer extension to be able to tie to revenue generating strategy. So whether it's a demand dividend, royalty financing, the issue there would be getting someone to actually create a fund who would specifically focus on revenue generating scalable businesses. I'm not thinking unicorns, but those where there is evidence of cash flow to have money come back, but do it in a way that it complements existing ecosystems, so it's not replicating what CDFIs are doing or community banks are doing, but it's really looking at that valley of death where you can't get to an SBA. And I would dare say look at both tech and non-tech, because certainly in the VC world, it is overweighted toward tech, which is just not as abundant in some of our communities. The other thing is I know there's some entrepreneurs east of the river who actually operate in buildings where they pray every year their rent does not go up. And so thinking about, are there cooperative models, or are there ways for them to actually buy their building? Or are there ways for them to create a fund with the neighborhood block, whereby people know each other and you want to actually preserve the fact that these three contiguous retail stores will be here when we all know the next Starbucks or Whole Foods is going to come. There's a way then to think about how do businesses operate together to then either create their own fund or go toward a real estate play, because now you've created something of value that is not scaring them from a transaction perspective, but the bottom line is it's collateralized by property that we all know is going up over time. So those are two concrete examples.
Yeah, so I have, through my work with Village Capital, become very obsessed with this idea of local money and how it directs local ecosystems. Work with you guys and in our work here in DC, and I started last year a group called Blueprint Local to focus on a lot more of what I was just talking about. And I think one of the things that is very different about the venture capital world and the opportunity zone incentive is when we raise our fund at Village Capital, you raise $20 million, you have 5 years to invest it. And that's how most funds work. With the opportunity zone incentive, investor sells a game. They have 6 months to put it into a fund, and then it's about 6 months more to put it into an opportunity. And so to be able to deploy $20 million into Southwest DC, you need to be able to deploy it in 6 months, not 5 years. And so what we did in Louisville, which I would say is like the minimum viable product of this kind of blueprint, is we got 11 businesses, and when we went to the guy, John, whose money it was, we're like, look, here's a $2 million opportunity where you invest in 11 businesses at once. Oh, and they're all neighbors. They're all, you're investing in an ecosystem. That was actually a very attractive thing. And so I would say at the fund level, we need managers like 1863 to do that organizing. I'd say at the neighborhood level, no one is holding you back from doing this yourself. So say, listen, there are 11 of us, and collectively we're raising 3.2 million. You can create a special purpose vehicle that is this street corners opportunity zone fund. But I would say critical mass of ability to absorb capital is one way. I think a second thing I would add is, like Melissa was saying, so a huge amount of attention goes to venture capital. 0.6% of businesses in the country raise venture capital. There are about 17% of businesses that get a bank loan. So 83% of businesses don't get venture capital or a bank loan. There are a number of people trying alternative investment structures, like here's how you can invest in me, and the employees of my company will buy out your shares. That's the kind of thing on a 5-year time horizon that's not doable. A 10+ year time horizon is much more doable. So I think innovation around structures that actually build wealth and equity for you if you're an entrepreneur or your coworkers is actually much more possible if we get the right structuring.
So one other idea, with my business, we were a restaurant, and it cost $500,000 to open a restaurant. Every time I opened a business, there was a brick and mortar component to what had to be invested for me to continue to grow my revenue. That is where I think it becomes very interesting. If you have a retail business that costs, let's say, $500,000 to open, okay, there is going to be money flowing into real estate where you could open your business that I believe will be very aggressive in funding you, okay? So when I stepped down as CEO of my business, I started thinking about what I wanted to do next, and I looked at buying this business called Honeydew Donuts. Okay, Honeydew Donuts is a franchised business. Okay, it's all throughout New England. What's very unique about Honeydew is it operates in low-income areas. That's where it's built. That's its DNA. Okay, I believe, and I still believe to this day, if you want to take advantage of this money, you go to these opportunity zone funds and you say, I have a business. It is successful. This is my business plan. You pay me, or you give me $500,000 to open this business, and I will pay you rent. If you can prove that you can be successful in these areas and you can help the community, I believe that is a great way to use this money and really take advantage of it. It doesn't work for all these businesses, and there's one of these sort of regulations around this 50%. You have to, 50% of what you sell has to come from an opportunity zone area. I hope that changes, okay? But for businesses that are retail, that need brick and mortar space, the idea of going to a fund that just spent $50 million to buy a property that has to then reinvest another, let's say 50, or maybe a little bit less than that, into that building, and to be able to say to them, I have a business that can work, you pay to open my business for me, I will pay you a decent rent. I think that's a great way to do it.
Great, just a couple of things, and I don't know if this was said a little bit earlier to give a little context to how much money we're talking about. Maybe I missed it a little bit earlier. So when we talk about capital gains being the pool of capital that can benefit from this incentive if it's invested in opportunity zones, arguably that universe is $6 trillion. Now, nobody believes that $6 trillion is going to come off the sidelines and come into these communities. But I think arguably people believe that anywhere from $100 to $200 billion a year will be mobilized. And that's a huge pool of capital. If you think of the traditional venture capital and private equity community that's been referenced, on average, each year about between $400 and $600 billion a year is raised. And as Melissa mentioned, less than 2% or less than 1% go to minority entrepreneurs, less than 2% or probably less than 3% go to women entrepreneurs. And you have that same type of statistics when you talk about SBA financing. Very few of that capital is going to people that look like us, and the majority of the people in this room. So what you find in that broader industry of $600 billion a year, those are largely tax-exempt investors, pension funds that don't care about or don't have a concern about capital gains and taxes and so on and so forth. So this new $100 to $200 billion a year, as we look at this is new, fresh capital coming from very different sources. And so one of the conversations that was had earlier on the panel before was developing relationships with people. So there's opportunities in our view to develop new relationships with new types of investors who have to put their money into these communities. And there are lots of entrepreneurs, lots of real estate developers that look like us, that have a sense and understanding of what the community needs. And so those are the types of transactions and deal opportunities that we're seeing. One of the critical things it's really important to understand as an entrepreneur is this capital is looking for a competitive rate of return. It's not looking for a discounted rate of return, it's looking for a competitive rate of return. We believe that it's a lot more beneficial because it's 10 years, and so going to be a little bit more patient, a lot more patient, and you can build a business differently if you know you have a 10-year exit versus a 3 to 5 year exit. But again, make no mistake, this is looking for competitive return, and to the point that was made earlier on the restaurants, we're looking at a lot of restaurants and franchises and healthcare facilities that need to be in the communities, and some of that are already existing, that are in opportunity zones that are generating significant revenues, significant profits, and have the opportunity to grow in similar communities and continue that growth. And so, again, we think that it's all very exciting. It's new, fresh capital that comes to the market, but there needs to be, in my opinion, fund managers like the people that you see here on this panel that can deliver a competitive return to investors, but have the intentionality to make impact in the communities. The one last thing I would add is that structure and understanding how these funds, at least today, are structured is very important. And what I mean by that, it's not, we use the term fund. In a traditional venture fund, you may have a pool of 100 deals, a pool of 20 deals. The way that the regulation is written now, when entrepreneurs or investors get their money out, you have to sell your stake in the fund. And so if you have 10 deals in the fund manager has to orchestrate how to get rid of 10 deals at the same time. That's not practical, that's not going to happen. That may change, but the way that it operates today, if you have those 11 entrepreneurs in a community, you can go to an investor and say, look, we have 11 diversified businesses, but we're going to set up 11 different funds for you to funnel the money in. So there's some intricacies about how the regulation works as it is today that's important to understand if you're trying to attract capital in a diversified way, in a pooled way with other entrepreneurs.
No, that's very helpful, thank you. The next question is, it's centered around commercial space purchases. Now, we've heard from many businesses locally that they're actually interested in purchasing commercial space. Could an opportunity zone investment help that business do that, and how would it work?
Absolutely. We're looking at deals now where entrepreneurs want to buy a building not only to house their own facility and their company will pay rent, but they have access to other tenants, whether it's entrepreneurs or co-working space, that can drive revenue. And so what that can do, if a opportunity zone fund would invest, I would see investing in two businesses. One, the operating company, media company, tech company, operating business, manufacturing company, whatever that is. So that's one investment. And then you have a parallel investment into the real estate. And so if you combine those two together, conceivably you can protect the downside risk of investing in an operating company or a technology company with having a hard asset as real estate. Now, real estate doesn't always go up, but it diversifies it and maybe de-risks it a little bit as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, the one sort of caveat or the one tough thing is this 50% rule, like I mentioned before. I think that makes it tough. But I do see a scenario like that. It's very similar to the scenario that I'm talking about, where the fund may own the real estate, but actually invest in the business, which could really give upward mobility through the business owner, who the owner of that business I think is very important. I think there is this way to use opportunity zone funds in this blended sort of investment into the business and into real estate. I agree with what you just said. This idea of real estate giving stability, I think is right. You have to get over that 50% rule still, but I do believe there's a way to do it.
I just want to say that what you both said surfaced the issue around what does the entrepreneur need to do to be ready.
Yeah.
And I think that cannot be underestimated because there's a cost for acquiring any type of capital, and I would say the costs are extremely high for this type of capital. Because I would imagine even Harbor, right, respecting the rigor and the stringency, there's going to be a whole nother layer of being prepared. And so what I would say is, I'll support the enthusiasm and cheer you on, but remember, right, that I would guarantee, with no disrespect, that your books probably need to be 60 to 70% better than they are right now. That you will need to have a lawyer that either is not your cousin but willing to give you a good deal, or somebody who's going to do some pro bono. I see Professor Cook in the place. I'm sure Georgetown can help you out. But I think we just can't underestimate that. Right? The money is not going to fall from the sky. And I do think that while we can get excited, I do want to make sure that entrepreneurs just don't think somebody's going to come knocking on their door and say, this is amazing, and then the check is going to come. Because part of, you talk to investors, yes, there is isms all over venture capital, right? But it is not designed to eliminate bias. It is designed to be strategically aligned with those highest performing businesses. And unfortunately, the data does not say it looks like me. But the element of rigor and the due diligence, I've watched entrepreneurs, and there's some VCs in the room who can't pass it, who can't get past that diligence. And so I would say to take the time to educate, what does diligence look like? Because it's different from a bank to a CDFI, to a venture capital fund. And I can only imagine for an opportunity zone. The other thing I would say is make sure that you recognize you're not just raising money, but you're growing your business. There is lots of money out there. And so I always say, what is your fundraising strategy? Don't say I'm going to an opportunity fund. What is your larger fundraising strategy? And do opportunity zones fit? Because I will say, we have some entrepreneurs, and make me nervous, I want to buy my building. I'm going, but you're not in the real estate business. Who are you bringing on to manage that? What happens if the pipe breaks? Who are you going to call? And so I do think you have to be mindful there's going to be a cost of your own investment in your infrastructure to be prepared to receive the money. And when you do, how do you then really scale appropriately so the returns are going to be there? Because it's not going to be somebody saying, hey, just call and check in. They go, where are your quarterly statements? And why are you down 3%? This is a problem.
I think that's some real talk for us as business owners as well. Like, we need to make sure we have our books together, make sure we understand why we're doing this, and how we can ultimately help it grow our business versus perhaps going in reverse. Next question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. This is really centered around small dollar investments. You know, now we know a lot of rich folks have money and they'll be investing in these zones. But how can normal, everyday people, middle-class people that might have a little capital gains or some investment money that they want to throw in, maybe not for a $20 million deal, but perhaps to crowdsource with community members to do a deal? So, Ross, you hinted at that a little bit. Anthony, I don't know if you guys have thoughts on this.
I think this is where trusted intermediaries really matter. So one of the things that I actually, as Melissa said, you know, people try things with best of intentions and then they don't quite work. One of the last big waves was crowdfunding, where the Jobs Act passed, and they'll say, oh, crowdfunding is going to solve all the problems for all entrepreneurs ever, and that's not true. But I think the reason why is it's an equity investment, is a very specific kind of investment, and investors have certain expectations and entrepreneurs have certain expectations, and I think people got very excited about the idea, and I'd say the gap between vision and execution ended up being pretty big. Over time, there have been a few platforms like Kickstarter raises money for you if you want to pre-sell your product very effectively, and so the market's maturing, and that's important. And I would say that this is kind of a next wave of maturing markets. So I'll give you an example of a group that I think is doing this very thoughtfully. There's a group in Houston called Next Street. I don't know, or Next Seed. Next Street is Austin, right? Or Boston. Next Street is Boston. Next Seed is Houston. They are a business. They have a fintech platform that does retail equity crowdfunding of businesses. They're second ward of Houston. They are headquartered right by the light rail stop. And there's a corridor that's a zone from the light rail stop to the river, if you're familiar with Houston. And there are about 17 businesses on this main street that are all on their platform. And you can buy one or you can buy into the whole neighborhood. But they have, you know, A+ books together, A+ diligence. I mean, the stuff that Melissa said, their quality is A+++, but they are a trusted syndicator who lives and works in the community. That's very, very important. So I would say, you know, that may be an opportunity for someone in this room to be that trusted syndicator or intermediary. I would say it would be amazing if the average person who has a, you know, $3,000 gain, which is a lot of money to probably most people in this room, not a lot of money in the capital markets, but if you could put $3,000 into the donut shop, that would be amazing. currently, I don't see the plumbing or infrastructure here in DC. I've looked across the country. I think this group in Houston is an example of a national best practice. But so yeah, I'd say yes, I would love to see that. And if the infrastructure and plumbing is what you want to focus on, go for it.
You know, I would agree with that, not to be a wet blanket, but I think, I mean, this law was not written to be easy for the average person. I wish I had $1 billion in capital gains, because it'd be very easy for me to invest through this program. That's something that we're currently working on to figure that out. And I can tell you that the white shoe law firms, the accounting firms are all spending millions of dollars to figure out how to go broader with this. Because right now, it's really easy for the folks that have, you know, entire offices dedicated to manage their wealth, and they still can't figure it out. So I think, to be fair, we're in early days. You guys are the smartest of the smart because you're here at the first inning in this building. But I would say we got to think about how to, you know, kind of think through the angel capital model, where you've got a group of friends that comes together to buy a building or buy an asset or invest in a business. You got to think about who your direct networks are, because the key is to move fast, given the time frames. All said, I think, you know, Melissa, you might agree with me that, you know, there's a lot of way to go before you can get to kind of a retail, you know, bent to this thing.
You know, one last thing to this is, I think communities should take advantage of the funds. Okay, everybody's talking about, should we invest in the fund? Should we partner with, you know, should we, you know, sort of gain off of what they're doing? I would say take advantage of the fund. So what I mean by that is, get a business plan together, prove why this retail business can work, why they should invest money into it. The money will be there. Take advantage of that money. I think the other side of it is, if $100 million is going to go into a community, get together and try to buy real estate, you know? Like, you know, if somebody is going to invest $500 million into a lower income area, take advantage of that money. Find businesses that they will invest in, and buy homes and buy properties in those areas.
So just two brief things. One on angel investing and individual investing. Obviously, I think it should go without saying, if you're going to put the money up, if you have that capital gain, be willing to lose it. Privately, investing in privately held businesses and small companies is on the extreme end of the risk spectrum where I've spent my career. So that's one thing. When if there are any platforms that emerge, and I think you mentioned it earlier, the entrepreneur, she mentioned it earlier, you want smart money. And so if there are platforms that emerge, if you're considering those types of platforms and you're looking to put your money into it, those managers should be able to add value to the deals that they're in. If you're taking equity as an entrepreneur, and these entrepreneurs know, it's a long-term financial marriage. I've been married for 20 years, and my wife she says what we do. She has a say in everything that we do, and that's to be expected. She's a vested equity partner in what we do. So if you take equity from investors, you should expect that. If you're crowdfunding into something, you want the person that has your voice, who's a steward of your money, knowing what they're talking about, so they can help build the return of the business that they're investing in.
Perfect. All right, let's open it up.
In fairness to the last panel, there was a lady who had a question that was, do you still have that question?
Yes. Okay.
Hi. So I was interested in whether or not we should be encouraging the local government to develop regulations around the opportunity zone investments that encourage development of affordable dwelling units at some ratio based on the number of jobs that are likely to be created. Because as long as you create business opportunities in low-income communities with low-cost real estate and much money chasing that low-cost real estate, we're likely to end up displacing large tracts of established communities in DC to the exurbs, which we don't desire either. So what ways should we think about encouraging the local government to develop regulations that help insulate us against that problem?
I would strongly encourage everybody in here to write everything they wish they could see and send it to Sharon and Kareem. And here's what, because you have to be careful, this is a federal law, so there's only so much that DC can do. But as I said before we came in, I was talking to Karima, where non-invested institutions like, what's the name of Fran's group?
Impact Investing Alliance.
So they just put out a bunch of guidelines, right, in the name of preserving this idea of impact and financial return. And it's a series of guidelines. Now, there's a recognition that there's no teeth to them, but at least it begins to create a North Star and signal that somebody's paying attention. I do think that strongly that the city should indeed have guidelines that are very specific across all types of investments, but that it needs to be driven by the community. Because in some cases, the city's interests are not the same as the residents' interests. But I do believe that there can be a common ground. So, sorry Sharon, but I know that she is serious and she will respond, but I think people need to give suggestions so that they are driven by what you're seeing, particularly if you live here. If you don't live here, don't give suggestions. If you live here for this franchise, because you know what your community needs, right? This golden parachute in and think I'm gonna solve all your problems has got to stop. But I do think that because I do suspect a lot of money is gonna be coming to DC, the city has to have a booth that says, before you enter, we're watching you. Not, it's a free-for-all, come do whatever you want to do.
Well, let's just go to another question.
You have to answer.
Sharon, your evening.
All right. So I don't know whose hand went up first, but this one.
Good morning. It's still morning. My name is Ambrose Lane Jr., and I was just recently elected to what's called the Fletcher Johnson Task Force. Fletcher Johnson is a former middle school that is 302,000 square feet that sits on a 15-acre plot of land that is in an opportunity zone. It's in Ward 7. So I'm very interested in hearing ideas of how to bring to bear. And we actually have a meeting with DMPED in March, in early March, how to bring to bear these opportunity zones for that type of property, because the potential is vast, both in terms of workforce housing, other market rate housing, as well as retail, as well as office space. It's a huge piece of property. It's the second biggest in DC right now that's considered for development. And so I'd really like to get your feedback and talk to you about how we can bring the expertise that you have to the task force to be able to make the right kinds of asks in the development project that makes sense for the community.
So I'll give you my thoughts. We always think about, Bo and I and other partners, how are you gonna make the most money, okay? I think you gotta think like that. How are you gonna make the most money? You're not gonna make the most money by selling it now. You're gonna make the most money by raising the fund yourself. So if you partner with somebody that knows how to do that, because there is expertise there, how do you develop? But I would say go out and raise the fund yourself. Partner with people that can help you, but keep that ownership in the community. That I think is the holy grail to this whole thing. If you go out and you sell that land now to an opportunity zone fund based out of New York with billionaires' money in it, great. Maybe it revitalizes the neighborhood.
Well, we're talking about a community land trust.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. So, but I would say that. I would say raise a fund by the, around the community. Partner with people that know what they're, that they can help you do that, because there's real expertise. I mean, I don't have the expertise, but there are developers that have that expertise. But keep the ownership in the community.
How do you use your land as collateral? Banks don't like to give collateral to vacant lots.
I don't think you can think about it as collateral. You're not raising debt. You're raising at some level equity, but you're getting the upside, right? So I think there's a difference. There's a difference to this, which is very interesting from an opportunity and from a neighborhood perspective. If you can raise capital where you're getting a large portion of that upside and raise a fund based, the community can raise a fund, I think that could be an amazing thing.
I will say that people, to the last question about community impact, the people who have
The most leverage in the impact conversation are not the government, but people who currently own land in opportunity zones. Because there's land, the land that is off market is selling at probably 20 to 30% below the land that is on market. And there are people who've been sitting on land forever who've been thinking the right time to sell, maybe it's the right time to sell. Whether it's setting up a special purpose vehicle that you or your group owns equity in, or whether it's selling if it's the right partner, we are finding actually that the Scaramucci's of the world are having a very difficult time acquiring land in opportunity zones because people don't want to sell to them, and people who are more mission aligned are having much easier time because people who own land usually live in the community and will probably continue to live in the community, actually really do care of it. So I would be incredibly demanding about what the impact and mission is that happens on top of your 300,000 square foot potential development or your vacant lot or anywhere in between. You are driving and owning the conversation here.
I would actually double down on that. I mean, there are 20+ billion-dollar funds that are out there trying to raise right now, of which one is Mr. Scaramucci. None of them have been able to raise money, part of which is because they can't find people to go into projects with. And doing a scan of what's out there, these 8,700 zones, talking to the investors, most of them think about 60 of them are excited. Most of those 60 are in places like Washington, D.C. So you've got quite a large fist to put on the table with your negotiating position as these funds start to come, and so do not discount that.
Yeah, I just wanted, I think we're talking a couple of institutions, or a number of institutions around the country, faith-based institutions that are focused on development in their communities. They either control assets or have members that control assets, they have members that are entrepreneurs, and they have a tremendous voice about what happens in their communities. And so the idea of them raising funds is a good one, partnering with developers who know what to do, but also partnering with investment managers who know how to manage money, because you're not going to get investors to give you money if you don't have investment management experience. And so that's critical to it. And I think all of those, to the first question, all of those constituents, the city, the communities, the developers, and the investment managers should have a say in that conversation. This capital that we're talking about is competitive. So if Maryland, the state that I live in, makes it too difficult because of their regulations and their views to have money come in, money's going to go to D.C., money's going to go to Delaware, it's going to go to Pennsylvania, whatever the case is. And so it's competitive. It's not a program where the money has to come to D.C. It has to be attractive enough to come to D.C. And my thing is, just because we are in companies that, communities that need development, it doesn't mean you can't provide and give a very competitive return to investors and do the right things and make the right kind of impacts. My history of the firms that I've been with, that's all that we've done, investing in communities, diverse entrepreneurs, and given a credible, competitive return to investors. If you can do that, then you can attract these dollars and have the impact.
Well, you're welcome. But I think what's important is when we saw in Atlanta, if anybody followed the Super Bowl, the church sold the land and nothing happened. There was no development, no nothing. So I want to say that that is a possibility, but back to your point, we got to put it together, because there were lots of promises made that a whole community with health, hotels, food was supposed to be established before that new stadium went up, and none of it is there. Because the church did its part, sold the land, the developers couldn't get the money, they were minority developers across the board, but they didn't tie the two together, and so they were like, well, it's already been sold, how do you know you're gonna get it? And the whole thing is just empty, and many newspapers, including the Post, wrote about, yet again, while not an opportunity zone, this is where I get nervous, because this is a way just to accelerate all the crap that's already happened to us, because we don't keep up. And so I have one suggestion for Sharon, and that is, if the city could figure out, because I don't want to say, but if you are hearing words that you don't understand, or you need like some finance, not accounting, finance 101, then I would ask that the city figure out, call the universities and see if professors are willing to do free seminars and clinics. Because things like SPVs, it's not just like a piece of paper you turn on. You have got to understand. And I would hate for people to go down this path and say, I got this, and then the whole thing falls apart. So, and I'm happy to call George down and I can work that out.
Hi, my name is Faraji Whalen Robinson. We're actually launching an opportunity fund. We're a Halcyon-based company, so we're impact focused. So my question for you guys was this idea of this mismatch between these huge amounts of capital that need to deploy and then the real problems, right, which are kind of 1 or 3 or 5 pieces of land which maybe have this very small need, right? How do you raise a fund which, to your point, kind of provides that market return to investors, but that gets over that hurdle of the management and overhead fees of trying to raise a fund for like a $500,000 investment? Like, how does that work?
Before you go, I just want to say one thing, because I know you and I know you take this very. we be careful with that language? Those 1 to 2 or 3, they're not a problem. They're underinvested and highly marginalized, and I think that we have to be careful, because even language in enforcing an investor and creating this false hierarchy, that there is greater power in the 200 million than what exists in the 2 million, we've got to be careful with how we position our communities, because too often we perpetuate the underserved. No, they're underinvested in. They are undercapitalized, but there's a significant amount of return. So I say that, and not about you, but I think I've heard people say, well, it's a problem, and they're bad. That's because ain't nobody done shit for 100-something years. I would just challenge us to use language that really speaks to how do we articulate the investment opportunity so that people see value in us, not just the underlying asset. I'm sorry, brother.
Yes.
Well, I've followed Melissa all day long, but I'm gonna second everything she says, but maybe go deeper on your question, which is, you guys know the story of Van Halen and the brown M&Ms? Do you guys? So Van Halen was.
Be careful, brother. Be careful.
Cut me off. Cut me off. Go ahead. Yeah, just cut me off and send me out if I'm going on the wrong track. So I'm obviously not from here, but Van Halen they were legendary prima donnas because they would always ask for a basket of only brown M&Ms in their dressing room, and people were like, what weirdos, what prima donnas? Those guys, they think they're the best. But the reason why was they had very advanced pyrotechnics and very sophisticated fireworks, and it was really dangerous. And what they did, they had a 191-page contract every time they would work with a venue, and on page 172, they'd be like, by the way, we want a basket with just brown M&Ms. And they would be able to walk into the dressing room and immediately see whether they had read the whole contract or not. And one time they showed up, I'm sorry, I'm not. One time they showed up and they didn't see brown M&Ms and said, sorry, we can't do the show. And that was the thing that got covered in the newspaper. I do think that I was in a mid-sized city a couple weeks ago, and there was a large family who's well-known in this mid-sized American city, and they pulled together all the community development organizations, and they said, we are well-known, we really want to invest in projects that have community impact. We've just sold a family business, we've got about $8 million in gains. What do you guys have for us? And 2 weeks later, none of these 15 community development organizations, all of whom have received philanthropy from this very famous family in the city, none of them brought a single project that was in an opportunity zone that was ready to take on their capital. Now, look, we have a 6-month window running out. So then they ended up saying, like, what in the world have we been paying for with our grant dollars? You can't bring one project. And I'm not from here, but I am from Atlanta, and the Vine City, Friendship Baptist Church, Falcon City, that's like, it should be its own reality TV show one day. I know all the players. I was brought in, one of our investors in Village Capital is a very large landowner who was looking at that deal, and they brought me in, and the developer who controlled the site sent me the financial model, and on the first page, there were errors in the Excel sheet format. And I was just like, look, if a person can't send you, where they're asking for millions of dollars, an Excel spreadsheet that doesn't have errors on page 1, it's kind of a brown M&Ms thing. Like, I would not trust them with tens of millions of dollars in your like, I don't care how great the project is, I don't care how impressive the person is, like, this is a brown M&Ms kind of thing. So I would say there are actually a lot of people who care about DC and are from here and mainly don't want the Post to say, oh, the Lerner family put money into an opportunity zone fund and now it's, everyone hates it. The people who particularly are of a city don't want that. But you have to be so good, so competent, so capable. You got to pass the brown M&M test. I would say put together the most ironclad $1 to $2 million investment case that is airtight, and say, look, this is de-risked. It's been processed with the community. The community wants this. You are not going to have a bad story written about you if you invest in this, and go from there. Just be so good that people can't ignore you.
Start off worrying a little bit.
Hi, Chadwick Charles. I'm disruptive because I'm a servant of God. So I'm listening, and we have such a prolific panelists here and stuff like that. And this is probably for DMPED. What involvement, or if any, have you guys had with DMPED in even planning this thing? Because I guess we are sitting here and we are listening to this, but this is just a panel for today. What happens to tomorrow? I think that there should be an advisory council or stuff like that, and it's an ongoing process. And so what involvement have you had, if you had any?
Sharon calls all the time. I promise to Sharon.
Again, I applaud DC for doing this, and we got called through our relationship that we had with another financial institution. And I think that may have come from our community development corporation's involvement in the community in Baltimore and other areas. But we also at Harvard Bank, we received a grant from the Minority Small Business Development Agency. This summer, we wrote this application knowing about opportunity zones, understanding the conversations that we were having that weren't with diverse entrepreneurs, really on the small business side. So we wrote a grant that said, look, we're going to go across the country and talk to in venues like this and in situations like this, explain to entrepreneurs, small businesses, what opportunity zones are, what could be the benefits, much of what you see here. So we'll be doing that in the second and third quarter. We're going to be doing something in this region, probably at the tail end of having gone to about 10, 12 cities. So what we do here in this region, probably in Baltimore, but we'll let everybody know that we can and push out. But we're going to get the learnings and the conversations of all the people that we've been talking to. As a part of that, not only are we talking to small businesses, which are our focus, we're also talking to investors and aggregating pools of capital that are interested in investing. The last thing I'll say, which is kind of going to your point, there are a lot of large funds out there, brand name financial institutions, whether it's Scaramucci or others, $3 billion, $500 million. We're seeing that they're having difficulty finding deals, period. And many of them are saying that we're not going to do deals smaller than $20 million. We think that's very, very attractive for us. That's our kind of sweet spot. Thank you. But at the same time, we don't have to talk to these large institutions. One, they're going to need to find ways to put their money to work, so we'll need to take that from that. But the other part is there are lots of, in every city, whether it's wealthy families or individuals who have made money elsewhere, whether it's in the companies that they work for, the tech companies or real estate they have or so on and so forth, that have capital that they want to put to work. And again, to the point that was earlier made, if you can put together a compelling plan and strategy, you got to get out there and find out where those people are. But there's a lot of money that's out there, I think, looking for good deals.
But I guess my question was just simply, so much talent up here, so much talent on the panel before. Why the legislators are using this set of talent up here before it comes to us in that sense? So, it's not left up to us because we're not knowledgeable in that aspect of what you guys
But
have.
then you just send an email and say, this is what I'm going to have. I mean, I think that's real, right? I mean, this is where, that's how legislation, that's how it should work. You get multiple cities here in DC. But at least locally, if you reach out to your legislator, they should respond to you. And I do think that that's important. And I will say, speaking for us, I mean, Sharon calls all the time. She sends us stuff. She makes sure that we represent, we can recommend people. So I think the effort is there, but I also think you have to remember, there's limited roles for government, particularly federal, so I think they're good at convening. I would say tell them what you want them to convene for. I mean, to your point, it's a great idea. Is there an opportunity for community funds, right? You live here for a certain amount of time, or you're here as a diverse group. When investors come, they talk to you. Because you know what? They have number time. And you should be able, can't say yes or no come, but I think just to get a sense or feel, but I think that's where, because legislation is still evolving, you got some time to really be creative about this and try to counter all the things that didn't work with similar type movements.
What is the horizon?
So we do have one.
Okay, sorry. On time, what is the horizon that we're talking about here from when you really expect to see dollars coming in to the early adopters to the tail end?
Well, I mean, we are seeing projects get done, but they're individual projects, people do it with their own money. What you're not seeing yet is people having the confidence to form pools and manage other people's money. They're not going to take the role of fiduciary and say, I can promise that these tax benefits are going to come through. The law hasn't really been codified yet. So we have not seen that large pooling effect that we hope to have happen. The first round of regulations came out at the end of December. It was supposed to come out a lot earlier than that. And I think there are maybe 40 or 60 issues that are really important to be ironed out in the second round of regulations. And it's going to take some time to get it right. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you're kind of talking summer timeframe before people have the confidence to get going. And you may have a different.
Yeah, I would agree. I want to on the board, there is real timing associated as it stands today. So to benefit from all the tax incentives for the investors, the 10% discount, 15% discount, and so on, in order to fully benefit for all of that, the money has to be invested in 2019. That may be pushed back at some point in time, but as it stands today, that money needs to be invested by 2017 to get the full benefit of those incentives. 2019, to get the full benefit of those incentives. Now, that said, even if nothing changes, those incentives will fall off over time, so you won't be able to get the whole 15%, maybe get the 10% discount on that original tax. And then at some point, you may, if things don't change, you don't get any of that benefit. But the reality is, the way things stand today, somebody can invest all the way through the end of 2026 or so, and get the benefit of that 10-year tax-free gain of your investment. Which is the biggest benefit, which is why all that money's out there is conceivably looking at it. So there's a good runway, but and so the last 2 points on real estate, I think there's enough clarity where people are raising funds and doing deals now. On the small business side, there are a lot of questions still that are out there. That clarity isn't there yet. And so if it takes until this summer before there is that clarity and guidance from the IRS, before people feel comfortable enough to invest in businesses.
I would add that if you're somebody who's seeking capital, you can use those milestones as real motivating factors. Understand what the investor's needs are. If they're on a ticking clock for that money to work because they realize the gain, that can work to your advantage, right? So these can be somewhat false deadlines for you, but real deadlines for them. So just be aware of what people's constraints are when you're talking to them. They realize the gain already.
Hi, I thank you for coming, but I wanted to know, because there seems to be a disconnect between the entrepreneurs in the opportunity zones already, who have business plans, who have, they know the neighborhood, so they know what's going to work, what's going to sell, what's going to make money, and the investors who are building the funds. So I wanted to know, where do the entrepreneurs and the landowners in these zones go with their business plan?
So right now it's a very inefficient process. So there are a few national directories of
People who have opportunity zone funds or thinking of opportunity zone funds. Just to get a sense of what was out there, I put my name and email and phone number in there, and I get about 5 random calls a day. Like, I probably got one when I was sitting here. Let's see. Yeah, voicemail from Brooksville, Florida. That was an entrepreneur real estate developer in Brooksville who called. I would not recommend that. I think that's a very inefficient use of your time. I think this is exactly the kind of thing that government should be doing. So as we look at that, being an honest broker, convening people, that's exactly what Katie and Sharon are doing today. And I think hope to do a lot more. So one of the good examples I see is in Kansas City. The Chamber of Commerce, the Urban Neighborhood Initiative, which is a coordinated group of the community development corporations, and the mayor's office have pulled together a kind of community prospectus development process where they are developing a series of deals that are vetted and processed by the community, where there is broad buy-in that yes, these owners are highly credible, or yes, this developer's vision has met community standards. And what they want to do is, let's take the hypothetical case of that family in a different city who had $2 million. What they want to be able to do is say, look, I've got $2 million, I want to put it in my hometown, I want to do something good. Oh, here's a list of deals or businesses that already have community buy-in. From an investor standpoint, that is highly de-risked, and I'm not going to get written up in the Kansas City Star if I put my money into that deal because I did something bad. That's not something that a fund itself could do, because there are all kinds of conflicts of interest about that. But that is the kind of thing that government or nonprofit or philanthropy could do. So I would encourage you to follow up with Sharon and Katie, not to create, well, this is exactly what you do. Yeah, this is their job. So I would encourage you to follow up with them and say, we need a clearinghouse, or we need an honest broker, or we need a community process so that the people who are building great businesses right around the corner from here are competing on a level playing field.
So one thing to add to that, this is what I am trying to do is to find businesses like this, businesses in this community that can be successful and that we can invest in through real estate. So I would love to talk to anybody here that is interested in that. And we are definitely looking for real businesses to invest money in through real estate, through Opportunity Zone Capital.
I would add to that, I think one of the things that you're doing, all of you are doing here today, is you're getting out to a venue like this. And there are investors in the audience, there are entrepreneurs in the audience, and obviously people here on the panel. There are these conversations that are happening in our region all of the time, especially right now. And then even neighboring states that aren't difficult to get to. So to the point that was, again, made earlier on the earlier panel, if you're raising capital, you want to go out and you want to touch people, feel people, talk to people, and develop a relationship with somebody. And this is a good venue, as good a venue as any to do it. Cold calls, and you can see what happened with cold calls and how well they work.
I'm gonna call back.
I spend a lot of time talking to people too, but I also look at deals that come to me from people that I know. So getting in touch with investors or people who may know investors, that's also beneficial as well. The only thing that I would say as it relates to something that is curated by a city or a state, and maybe for my partners and myself, and I think other folks here, we're very active in our communities, and we feel that we have a very good and a very strong deal flow that we develop through our own personal networks. 99% of the deals that I'm going to do are going to come through my personal communication with people in those deal networks and being at places like this where I meet people. Probably not through platforms that are curated by people that I'm not sure know how to vet deals. So that's just my portion.
Okay. One quick close out? And then
One
we'll-
quick closeout, put a plug in for the bankers on the stage here. I think they can be a real catalyst. There are 25,000 bank branches in opportunity zones across the country. 25% of the entire banking network in the country is in opportunity zones. If you look at the minority-owned banks, more than half of their branches are in the zones. They've been there for 100 years. They know what's good, what's bad, what's up and coming. And so we've been urging investors to say, go talk to local community banks. They're probably not lending to some of these businesses because they don't have equity, and you're bringing equity. So why don't you partner up with local community banks who may provide a working capital line of credit to the same business that you want to target. So we've been looking at those local banks as conduits to get from entrepreneurs.
That's brilliant. So I think we need to wrap up. Getting the look. Okay. And so one thing I will say is this has been an incredible panel. One, for just the tangible ways that small businesses can get involved and actually attract investment. But two, getting opportunity to see some kind of friendly faces and people that are familiar with the neighborhood and have good intentions and help us leverage this new legislation. So let's give them all a quick round of applause.